Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Game Over International. My name is Lyss, and I'm here today to join you for the third edition of this particular series that we have going on over here at Game Over. So, this is the 2024 International Ice Hockey Federation World Junior Hockey Championship series we got going on here, presented by SDPN and EP Rinkside. Super excited to be here today. I'm one of the hosts of regular Game Over Winnipeg, and I am joined by the one and only Lauren Kelly of Elite Prospects. Lauren, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you. Honestly, it's so funny. This has kind of been a team effort over here at SCPN to kind of pull together a couple different hosts to host these games, and I felt like it's kind of like a elementary school group project where I was going to be doing this on the SDPN side, and Lauren was going to be doing it on the Elite Prospect side, and we happened to be put on the same show together. That's when we knew it was going to be a good one, and it's the Sweden game of all things. We knew it was going to be a really, really fun one tonight, and well, is fun the word that you would use, Lauren? I don't know. Walk me through how you felt about that game, just kind of your overall thoughts right off the hop.
Yeah, and I think the best way to describe that game, I think positively, is that a lot of things happened in this one. And truthfully, I wasn't exactly sure what kind of performance we were going to get from Team Canada heading in. Obviously, with the roster construction just on paper, you knew that Sweden was a significantly more deep, more talented, more skilled team than the version of Team Canada that was brought over to Sweden to play this tournament. And I think we saw kind of basically my expectations play out where they struggled to penetrate the inside of the slot. They really couldn't generate much of any kind of scoring, high danger scoring chances, and I think they were fighting the puck all game long. The result of this game is pretty much what I expected, not necessarily that they were going to get I guess like kind of dominated in certain sequences, but the result is probably what should have happened coming into this game, and it is what ended up playing out.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the context of everyone that's here, I think maybe before we even really dive into the specifics of this game, I want to take a little bit of a step back, and because we talked a little bit about the roster construction and stuff like that, right? About why you thought that this Canada lineup that they chose to bring to this tournament maybe isn't the best lineup that they should have chosen to bring. What are your thoughts on that, and what do you think? Obviously, we'll get into the specifics of what this roster that they are who they are, what could they have done differently, but before that, just kind of taking some of the onus off of the players here. What are your thoughts on the construction of this roster and kind of what its pitfalls are?
Yeah, and I think immediately when the selection camp roster was announced, there were some interesting omissions. I think, obviously uh, you're missing a guy like Riley Height, who was, I think, at the time leading the WHL in scoring. There were a lot of younger, more highly skilled guys that they left off in favor of, a guy like Owen Allard, who to his credit, has certainly played up to expectations. He's done exactly what the team has asked for. But I think at the time of the roster being named, there were a lot of question marks around his inclusion over some of the more higher skilled guys. And I guess they sort of stressed that this is going to be a 4-line team, we're going to roll 4 lines, are going to have great chemistry, they're going to work together well. I honestly don't think they found combinations that work yet, and I mean we obviously saw it in this game. They were trying some new combinations, and I'm sure we'll get to that eventually. And I think that sort of already manifested itself at selection camp. And I was fortunate enough to go to Oakville and spend a couple of days there and watch the selection camp games. I already thought from the get-go in those games that the lines looked discombobulated. They struggled to find chemistry with really anyone there. They brought Jordan Dumay's line mate in Halifax, Marcus Vidicek, and I thought, those two even didn't really look like they had a lot of chemistry together, even though they play together all the time in the queue. So I thought that was a bit of a concern. Also, Easton Cowan and Denver Barkey were both there. They also struggled to get chemistry going, and obviously Barkey was eventually cut from the team, as was Marcus Vidicek. So I was a little bit concerned about, the amount of kind of like, I guess, they had a lot of players named to camp who were familiar with each other, but that kind of chemistry and familiarity didn't really necessarily play itself out on the ice. And then obviously the cuts were made. I think the most surprising one to a lot of people who weren't there was Jagger Furcus's cut. And, there were a lot of questions once he was released. Is Canada going to struggle to score? Are they going to lack that dynamic offensive producer who can kind of, turn a game on its head? And again, we saw that tonight where Canada really needed somebody to step up and score. a big goal for them. And maybe Jagger Firkus could have been that guy had he not been released from a selection camp. On the flip side, Firkus didn't have a good camp. He wasn't the only one. I didn't really think anybody who attended that selection camp really played that well. I thought they pretty much got worked by U Sports, bigger, stronger, faster team. Obviously, they've had a lot of time since then to kind of, gel as a team, and I'm sure they're very close off the ice. It's just we haven't really seen them kind of find that closeness on the ice. The chemistry is just lacking significantly right now, and it's what killed them tonight.
Yeah, 100%. A lot of people I think have talked a little bit about the choice to deliberately choose maybe some larger players, maybe some more role style players, as opposed to just the most skilled and talented lineup. And I think it's interesting that you specifically bring up Jagger Firkus. Like, I think he's kind of the big name that gets circulated a lot. But even in a game like this, when, you have late power plays and things like that, the fact that we have a Team Canada roster that couldn't score clutch goals in a game like tonight is kind of crazy, and I just feel like we haven't seen that in the last couple of years. And maybe it's there have been criticism and complaints over the last few years about this turning into more of like a skilled showcase and stuff like that, where you have 12 forwards just playing their individual skills comp as opposed to playing a team game. So maybe they overcorrected on that, but I don't know, just kind of overall, maybe to get more specifically into this game, what are your thoughts on the lineup that they did bring, and then what you were expecting from them going into this particular match?
Yeah, and I think the lineup that they ended up bringing, that's not to say that there's nobody on this team who can score. I mean, you look at Matt Savoy and Connor Geekie and Carson Raykov, who's a goal per game guy in the OHL this season. Jordan Dumais, who is I think scored almost 150 points in his QMJHL career. These are all super talented guys who have the ability to create dynamic offense and to break games wide open and to kind of be the game breakers in a game like today's game. And they just, honestly, it felt like the entire team as a whole was kind of fighting the puck the entire time. The chemistry just wasn't there from the lines, and I don't necessarily think that their skilled players are being set up for that much success. And we talk about the power play not being able to get it going. There are a couple of players on those units where I question their position on there right now. When you look at the fact that Carson Raykov and Braden Yeager are two of their best shooters, and neither of them are playing half wall in the power play. Raykov isn't even on either unit, and he's struggling to get ice time. Which is an interesting personnel decision, one that I don't necessarily agree with, but obviously I'm not the coaching staff. I don't work with these players day in and day out. So if they believe that, a guy like Owen Allard should be on the power play in the bumper, he's been very successful there in pre-tournament. I think he scored a goal through the bumper position. Obviously that's something I would like to see, maybe them tinker with the personnel there. I think, if history has proven at this tournament, if your power play isn't rolling, you're not gonna make it that far in this tournament. And we saw last year's power play was so loaded with Bedard and Dylan Gunther and Brennan Hoffman, Shane Wright, Olin Zellweger, and obviously we don't have the same caliber of talent on this year's team, but there are still guys who could provide that kind of consistent offense to get that power play going. And right now I think the players that are being put on those units are not necessarily the best players for that, and they kind of need to change something up because their recipe right now is just not working.
Yeah, 100%. And, spoken as a Jets fan here who regularly does the Game Over Winnipeg shows, power play woes are all too familiar to me. And I see it's probably the same for a lot of familiar names and faces you have in the chat here. We have Brady, we have Mike, we have David, we have Blake, we have Owen. Lots of people in the chat here today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We're doing the Game Over International here, the SDPN and Elite Prospects combination, collaboration, all that good stuff over here. It's myself and Lauren Kelly chatting a little bit about this one. Can we dive a little bit more into that power play and a couple of the personnel choices that they had on that one? Half wall is obviously in my opinion at least, half wall is one of the most important spots, if not the most important spot, to have the best person in that, or the best fit in that particular spot. If you don't have a good anchor or a good shooter on the half wall, it really can hinder a power play, especially in a game like this. What were your thoughts on the units that they were kind of rolling out and certain individuals? I see a couple people are throwing a couple names in the chat. I'm sure we'll get to the Fraser Mittens of it all, but just thoughts on the personnel of the power play and what you think they could have done differently, including the Braden Yeager perhaps in the half wall and things like that to really leverage the opportunities of the odd man advantage.
Yeah, and I think the biggest though I mean, I tweeted it earlier tonight where it's like Canada's power play has basically this Jekyll and Hyde kind of mentality where if they can get possession right off the draw and they can get set up quickly, and then Celebrini has the set play where he feeds Geeky down low on the doorstep for a tap in. That's the one set play that's kind of really worked. And the other one I think that worked was Savoy down low feeding Allard on the doorstep. So those are the only kind of plays that they have had success with on the power play. They're both passing sequences, and against a team like Sweden, who's so good at clogging lanes and disrupting passes and poke checks, you really need an outside shot threat. And I think it was maybe to the Canadians' detriment that we didn't get to see their power play until late in the third period. I think if we had seen their power play struggle that significantly in the first period, maybe that would have forced Alan Letang to make some personnel decisions if they had gotten another power play later in the game, maybe when Owen Beck was, if they had called a penalty on the Owen Beck hit. But obviously, if you're not having, if there's not a shot threat on either power play unit, I think at some point the team that's defending is going to expect, okay, a lot of cross seam passes, they're going to funnel pucks down low. It becomes more predictable and it becomes a little bit easier for them to anticipate the movements. And if you're only having success with that one set play with the Celebrini pass to Geeky, then that's pretty easy to stop if you just kind of anticipate his moves pretty quickly. I mean, the end of the day is just they need to change something up on that power play. I mean, we know that I think there's something like maybe in the last 15 years, like if Canada's power play is not first or second, they usually don't end up medaling, which is not an encouraging sign at this point in the tournament, even though we're only, partially through the round robin. But they really need to find a way to get this power play going, because even against Latvia and even against Finland on opening day, there were still struggles to get set up in zone, can generate consistent, constant pressure. And I think if they can't figure out a way to get it going, then that's definitely going to be one of their downfalls.
Yeah, absolutely. But like you mentioned, that power play really only, we got to see it, try and fail, for lack of better words, later in the game. And a good chunk of that game was spent at 5-on-5, not a huge penalty calling game. I want to talk about, generally speaking, 5-on-5. But before we do that, I'm very curious to hear everyone's thoughts in the chat and yours, just before we move on from the penalties thing. Nothing on the Owen Beck board? Can we talk about that for a second? Because listen, I was hearing lots of commentary from, obviously, Mike Johnson was giving his bit on the broadcast, lots of people talking on Twitter, because we had that one under review for a little while. But the Swedish guy is grabbing the jersey a little bit and shoving him into the boards. Like, listen, I don't think that that's like an ejection sort of hit or anything like that, but when you're that tight to the numbers along the boards and someone looks like they could have separated both of their shoulders. Thank God Owen Beck came back out afterwards. Very pleased to see that he's okay, because I actually thought he was playing a pretty good game, all things considered. Was that the right call, in your opinion? And I'm curious to know everyone's thoughts in the chat, too. Brady says, easiest 2-minute boarding call ever, but turns out the refs didn't agree. What did you think?
Yeah, and so I feel like when it comes to Owen Beck, I might be a little bit biased because of what I've done in the last couple of seasons, but I just taking a step back from that kind of, I guess, bias, I guess is for lack of a better word there. Yeah, it probably should have been 2-minute boarding call. I mean, Beck does turn right at the last second to protect his head, which is the smartest thing he could have done. You'd rather injure your shoulder than injure your head. And thankfully, the shoulder injury was not that serious. I mean, obviously, we might find something out tomorrow. It's an off day. He may not be 100% for the rest of the tournament, but thankfully, he seemed like he was fine. He played the rest of the game. It should have been a 2-minute boarding call. I understand why the refs made the decision that they did, that he turned at the last second to brace for impact and he didn't go head first into the boards. And I mean, they made the call that they made. I'm not confident that Canada would have even scored on the ensuing power play. So it is what it is. I don't really think it would have changed much of the complexion of the game at that point. Like with 7 minutes to go at that point, they were on their heels. I don't think they got a shot on goal in the third period until halfway through it.
Yeah.
So I'm not confident that even if they had the power play, I mean, obviously it would have been an opportunity to sustain pressure. I'm not too confident that it would have resulted in any kind of different result to the game, regardless of whether it was a 2-minute minor, 5-minute major, or no penalty at all, which is what they ended up going with. So I can empathize with the referees. I'm glad they have the opportunity to review penalties in this tournament, because I think, they make the right call more often than not.
Yeah.
I think we're a little bit used to seeing them be so strict on these kind of infractions that I think a lot of us were taken aback by the fact that they downgraded it to no penalty at all. That being said, probably should have been, I believe it should have been 2 minutes, but it is what it is.
100%, yeah. And I think that the thing with this is also just the larger fabric of it being IIHF, where we tend to see them being a little bit more stricter with what they call and things like that. So I think that's why a lot of people were a little surprised. But we see plays like that in the NHL that don't get called pretty frequently and stuff. And it is a non-factor. Like, listen, I'm not going to sit here and say, you know what, Canada lost this game because Owen Beck didn't draw a 5-minute major. And no, I'm not saying that. But it was definitely a little bit surprising to see that from the IIHF standard reffing. But all that's to say, not what made or broke that game. I don't like saying that phrase in past tense. We're gonna move on from that. But a lot of this game was spent at 5-on-5. Peter Klein, host of Game Over Calgary, who also hosted the first Game Over International with SDPN and EP Rinkside a couple days ago, mentioned big part of this game. We have a couple of Swedish fans in the chat here. Sweden played a really good game. Like, holy cow, this is a good hockey team they have right here. Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts were on this Sweden roster and kind of what their really strong points were that Canada struggled against today.
Yeah, I think on paper, I think we look at the Americans and we think that's the offensive firepower team. This Swedish team is just so well constructed from top to bottom. You've got goaltending, who between the two of them, between Hugo Havelid and Melker Tillin, have not allowed a goal yet in this tournament, which is incredibly impressive. The defense, clogging lanes, intercepting passes, their coverage, they rarely break down in their own end, which is so impressive. I think the one miscue they had was the Carson Raykov breakaway in the first period, and after that they locked it down and they were phenomenal in this game. And then the forwards, you've got 4 lines you can actually roll consistently who can generate offense. Jonathan Lekaramäki and his crazy shot. The players are not afraid to get to the hard areas of the ice to score goals down low. They're just really well-rounded, well-constructed, and this is a group that is very strong. An age group that's very strong. They're very comfortable playing with each other. They're used to working well together, and you can tell we did a lot of videos with the Swedish team off the ice, and you can tell how close this team is, and it's really a brotherhood among this particular group of players, and how comfortable they are with each other. So that is to say that of course it bleeds onto the ice. They're so used to playing with each other, it's like second nature to them. And this, from top to bottom, they are the gold medal favorites in my eyes. I mean, the Americans, offensively, they're stacked, but have some questions defensively and in goal. I don't really see any glaring weaknesses with this Swedish team, and that's what made them so dangerous in this tournament. And that's pretty much what they did to Canada tonight, is they didn't give them an inch. And that was the most impressive, I guess, top to bottom performance I've seen from a team at this tournament in a long time.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that, when we look at the Americans, I like to think are kind of just a little bit of a better but similarly constructed team to Canada, in the sense of like a lot of, individual star power and things like that. But the defense is maybe the bigger question mark and all those kinds of things. And a lot of people think that, and I am also one of the big proponents of offense wins championships, not defense kind of thing. Like, I think if you have players that are really good at scoring goals, you should let them score goals across the board. But in a game like this, like, you see how that tight-knit defense can really change the outcome of a game. And I think that a big piece of what Sweden looked so good to me on the defensive side was how quick they were on Canada's forechecking Canada. And what I mean by that is transition is a piece that I always look for in hockey games, because it's a really important chunk to look at, to understand, sorry, I'm getting a mess. Yeah, to understand how players are able to adapt to the situation that they're being put in and what the pressure looks like. And I thought that today Canada had to focus a little bit more on making more stretch passes as opposed to carrying the puck out, which I think they're a better carry-out team, but Sweden was on them fast. And they had to make a lot of exit passes that I don't think they really wanted to make, but it was kind of, that's better than not clearing the puck, which we saw really burnt them on that first goal, and the second one is too, right? So I think, what are your thoughts on kind of how Canada managed in their own zone today against this really well-constructed 5-man unit?
I think puck management was an issue from the get-go, and I think they weren't ready for uh like kind of the overwhelming, stifling forecheck that is the Swedish team. I also think, it's important to note that this isn't the A team defense that Canada wanted to bring to this tournament. I mean, they lost Tristan Luneau and Tanner Molendyk right before the tournament started. They had to bring Ty Nelson and Jorian Donovan from overseas, neither of which I thought looked good at all at selection camp. Um, Obviously Matejchuk left with an injury briefly in the first period. We don't know what his status is. Do they need to call a third defender overseas to kind of, bolster the depth a little bit? That would be a big concern. Well, because the last defenseman from selection camp would be Michael Butchinger. He also plays in the OHL, also struggled at selection camp. Same issues kind of with defensive play. And I just think they just got overwhelmed. They got outworked. They got overwhelmed. They didn't really have an answer for the kind of overwhelming Swedish forecheck. And then the other issue was not just on the defensive side, but the forwards coming back, the plays with the puck. They were back to support, but they couldn't clear a puck to save their lives. It was kind of rough the amount of times the puck was turned over by forwards coming back in support. I mean, you looked at Fraser Minton down low on the boards helping out, chipped a puck right to a Swedish defenseman. Matthew Poitras couldn't clear the puck out of the blue line, was turned over and led to a scoring chance. So, these are two defensively responsible guys who are going to be very good defensive centers in the NHL one day. Just really had off games, and that's also just compiled into a whole string of issues for all of Canada, and it just, kind of broke down further and further as the game went on. And I don't anticipate that they're going to kind of have the same struggles for the rest of the tournament, definitely not in their careers. It was a bad game. Every player has bad games, but it was just kind of one of those things where every player had the same bad game in this one game, and it cost them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was, sometimes you say big hockeyisms and you're like, I sound stupid, but sometimes they fit the bill. And Canada needed someone to come up big in the last few minutes of that game, and there was just no one that had the wheels, no one that had the drive. It was just not the game to do that. And you need someone who's able to come up and play big for you in those moments, and there just didn't feel like there was anyone on that team who was able to do that today, which is always a little bit, disappointing. But let's harp on them even further. And I want to start naming some names, because I do think that there is something to be said about, a lot of these players. And we can always preface this by saying these are kids. This is a hockey tournament. It's really not that big of a deal. But, we're here to do some analysis. So what are we going to do? We're going to analyze what went wrong. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the line decisions, some of the changes. Obviously, the blender came out later in that game. Obviously, when you have 13 forwards playing regardless, you're going to have some shuffling around. A lot of the shuffling tended to happen on that third line, the Macklin-Celebrini line, with shuffling a couple wingers around there with Matthew Wood and, whoever else, Braden Yeager. I don't know. It depended on the shift. But early in the game, the first line that they start with is Fraser Minton, Connor Geekie, and Jordan Zumet. That line, I didn't think was bad to start the game. Listen, they weren't. There's definitely more potential within that line, but eventually they started shuffling around and all those kinds of things. But Fraser Minton gets my, little question mark today. He was not as good as I was expecting the captain of Team Canada to be. What are your thoughts on that player and kind of what we saw from him today with the different lines that he was on, the power play, and just kind of what his impact was on the team today?
Yeah, and I first want to preface this by saying I don't doubt Fraser Minton's leadership abilities in the slightest. I'm sure they chose him as captain for a reason. They just haven't found a fit for him. They're trying to use him as a utility guy, but a top six utility guy. I don't necessarily think that's where his strengths lie. And I think that's why that top line with Geekie and Dumais, who have never played with each other, that's why they look so disjointed. I don't know why that's the combination they kind of settled on to start the tournament. And we really didn't see it become an issue until today, even though it was quite obvious they were struggling to, generate any sort of consistent pressure, any cycle in the offensive zone. It's kind of like three different guys who are used to doing three different things on the ice. Dumais is that super dynamic, high offensive guy. Geekie, similar. Minton is more, he's going to be a defensive center, a defensively responsible center, two-way guy. He can chip in offensively, but that's not necessarily the guy I would put up there with kind of those two high skilled guys. I mean, if you're going to put Dumais with Geeky, maybe you put someone up there who is a little bit better at forechecking, someone like Easton Cowan, who I also don't think has had a really great tournament, also had a bad selection camp. He admitted it. There's just a lot of personnel decisions. I mean, the first line is I've said from the get-go, I think even midway through the first game against Finland, that they need to fix the top two lines. I mean, you got when the Owen Allard, Owen Beck, Nate Danielson line is your best line and it's your fourth line, there are problems. And when you have guys like Carson Raykov and Matthew Wood and Braden Yeager who are filling out your bottom six, and then you have guys like Easton Cowan and Fraser Minton, Matthew Poitras, even though I know he's come back from the NHL, when those guys are filling up your top six at the expense of more highly skilled guys, that's where I have a little bit of questions. Obviously, I understand you got to play. You can't just outright bench your captain. That's just not a great look. And Poitras is an NHL guy. I mean, he's proven it all season that he belongs in the NHL this year. You can't really demote him to the bottom six. There's sort of this like almost political side at play here too with the lines. And then, with Celebrini on the fourth line for what they called the fourth line. I don't think they really referred to it as a fourth line in that locker room. But with them being deployed as the fourth line, especially in the first two games, that didn't really make a lot of sense to me, given how dynamic he is on the ice. Like, if you really want to generate something consistent, why not put Celebrini up there between Geeky and Savoy? Just give it a go. See how it looks. Your three most highly skilled players, see how they look out there at even strength, not just on the power play. And then, the lines have to get shuffled. I mean, guys who are not performing, regardless of whether they came from the NHL, almost made the team out of training camp, whether they wear a letter, maybe it's time that the lines get shuffled regardless of, what else is at play here. Like they just got to figure something out with the chemistry of the lines, because even I'm not even that blown away by the Beck Danielson Allard line. Like, I don't think it works either. It looked okay against Finland in pre-tournament games. It was probably pretty strong, but even tonight they were pretty kind of lackluster. So the lines as a whole need to get shuffled. I loved seeing Beck up there between Geeky and Savoy, but I don't think that's necessarily going to solve any issues. It's the same problem you have with Minton being up there between the two of them, which they did also try in the second period. I would love to see Celebrini moved up to the top line. I think you gotta find a way to get the three of them going, him, Geeky, and Savoy. And as soon as you get the three of them going, it's gonna really feed into the rest of the roster. Okay, there's gonna be a lift. Like, the first line can drive your offense, and then everybody is gonna, there's gonna be a little bit of pressure lifted off everybody's shoulders. Carson Raykov needs to play more. I mean, this guy's 31 goals in the OHL this season, and he's played 31 games. So the fact that he was the 13th forward, I didn't agree with to start camp. He's obviously earned more of a role based on how well he's played. Matthew Wood is another guy I think shouldn't be really 13 forward. I think he played so well against Latvia that I felt like he had really turned a corner at this tournament and deserved more ice time. And I wonder if you tried them on the second line. They need to play more minutes. They need to play Yeager as well as another guy, like super highly skilled offensive guy. He needs to play more. Like, if you want to find a way to get your offensive guys going, you need to put them in positions to succeed. And they do that. They did do that with, Geeky, Savoy, Jordan Dumais. But there's a lot of other highly skilled guys on this team that have gotten going, and they need to find better roles for them, more consistent roles for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you could sort of do, the comparison, right? It's very easy to finish that game and say, well, what can we do that Sweden does? Because obviously they're doing something right that we're not. And you talked about the tight-knittedness that you can experience when you see them firsthand, at pre-tournament and everything like that. And this is also a group of players that I believe has been together, for a couple of U18 tournaments and Hlinka Gretzky's and whatnot, right? Like, I think this is a group that's kind of grown together, and it shows to a certain capacity. And we know that's also the piece that I always think about when it comes to these tournaments. Like, these are children. These are 19-year-old boys. Like, think about a 19-year-old boy that you know in your life. Like, I'm sorry, they are not emotionally regulated. They are very biased people, all these different kinds of things. So, like, for example, and again, I'm a very biased person, I got to watch Savoy pass pucks to Connor Geeky net front and score goals all season long for the WHL, for the Winnipeg Ice, my local junior hockey team, rest in peace, of course, for the last couple seasons. Why not throw those guys together. We know they have chemistry. We know they know how to work together. And then what you can do is if they can get running together, they can, work properly. That means there's a third guy that's able to generate some chemistry with them and stuff like that, generate some of his own momentum. And if it's, whatever's going on, you could throw that guy off and throw someone else on there. And all of a sudden you can sort of continue and snowball that momentum if you're able to just sort of, it starts somewhere, right? And that's the big piece with it is that right now, like you said, the Allard Beck Danielson line was like basically the best there was. And if that's your best line, and your best line is still probably in like a 53% Corsi, like it's really not like they were dominating or anything crazy like that. Like there's a problem, and you can afford to have a couple games where some people are having some slower, sloppier games when someone's picking up the slack and carrying the weight elsewhere. But it just kind of felt like across the board today, no one was fabulous by any means. No one was awful. That's the other piece. It makes it harder to be disappointed, and it makes it harder to be frustrated with this team because no one was really bad. But it's just your team can't consistently be meh, right?
Yeah, and I think a large part of that is the personnel decision and the deployment. Like you can't, if you don't give your players an opportunity to succeed, all of them, like there are just some guys, try as they might, they are just not cut out to play depth roles, depth defensive roles. It's just not who they are. And you got to figure that out really quickly in this tournament. Is this a guy who can abandon the offensive side of the game completely for 2 weeks and just take defensive zone draws, work on D-zone coverage? Like, is that a guy who can play this kind of role, or is he going to be better served, on a power play unit? And if that's the kind of thing that they haven't necessarily figured out yet, and they're using all these top guys depth guys on the power play units instead. Like you see, like no disrespect to Owen Allard or Fraser Minton, but these are not guys that should be on your first or second power play unit over a guy like Carson Raykov or Brady Yeager. So there have been some decisions, like if you can get the power play going, if you can flip that on its head, that generates more momentum as well. Like not just at even strength, like if as soon as you get the power play going, like I feel like it's just going to be a weight off of a lot of these guys' shoulders, like especially for the guys who are known for their offensive talents. I haven't thought that Jordan Dumais has looked like himself either, for a guy who's 140 to 160 points in the queue in his career. I haven't felt like he has sort of found his game yet here. He's another guy, like obviously he's on the power play, but right now maybe if it's not working for Dumais, maybe you try another highly skilled guy up there. There's a lot of questions that are going to be asked of this coaching staff and this team over the next 48 hours between now and when they play Germany. And the Germans are no slouch. I mean, they knocked off Finland. I don't necessarily think you can look at that as an automatic win. They played Sweden pretty well too before Sweden finally blew the game open. This is a team they can't look past. Like if Germany gives any sort of pushback to this team and they still haven't figured it out by then, there's going to be a lot of questions heading into the quarterfinals, because like this is not a surefire medal contending team. I think there's a lot of questions about whether they're even going to make it out of the quarterfinals. Like if they go up against Slovakia or Czechia or even the US, if Slovakia ends up winning their group play game against the US and wins the group, like do the Canadians finish third? Maybe they lose to Germany and they end up playing the US in the quarterfinals, right? Like there's so many questions about this team and their ability to kind of be the Canada that we're so used to seeing. And I think we maybe got spoiled a little bit with the Connor Bedard years. Like we're not used to seeing this kind of team. And this team reminds me a lot of, a team from 2019 or 2018 where there's not a lot of Max Comtois year. And then like history has shown at this tournament, when Canada has very few returning players, that they usually don't perform that well.
Yeah.
There's only one this year, and I God bless Owen Beck, but I don't really consider him a full returning player. He only played 3 games, so he didn't even play half of the last year's tournament games. So like there's so many questions with this team, and I think we're probably seeing a little bit of the inexperience at play too, especially in this game. I think we got a team with like at least 4 or 5 returning players probably doesn't get hammered the way they did tonight. And if you think about even last year, Beck wasn't on the team for that opening day loss to Czechia. He didn't see, I guess he wasn't in the room to see how the team responded after that. So, there's something else too at play, something that, is this team just not used to kind of having to face this kind of level of adversity on an international stage, on arguably the biggest international stage for junior hockey. So there's a lot of questions between now and New Year's Eve. I'm truthfully just glad I don't have to be the one to figure that out. I mean, that's up to the coaching staff. So
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I'm gonna, make you role play that role anyway. So
sure.
say, we have a chance to, connect with Canada, all these kinds of things. And what, looking at a couple of big things that are, not necessarily easy fixes, but tangible things that we can flip right now. Obviously, for example, making a couple personnel changes on the power play, I think could change a lot, because, power plays can help you pot a couple goals that can really change, the course of a game. Like in this one, for example, 1 or 2 power play goals would have changed everything. And like you said before, it's also supposed to be a little bit of a cheat code to help players build momentum because they're able to score automatic goals and things like that could help translate into the 5-on-5 game. So, couple tweaks on the power play and whatnot. What are some quick changes that you would make, whether it's lineup decisions, maybe, some crazy thoughts about benching some players, or maybe just changing, the way right now they were running a really, like, I love trying to watch for systems and stuff like that, but today I was like, hey, they're running like a 2-1-2, and I was like, this isn't even a real hockey system. Like, what are we doing out here? Like, they were
There's
having
no
some
system
fun.
right now.
No, genuinely. So I'm like, I can't come up with anything like that. And also, international ice, like there's lots of room out there and stuff. But what are some tangible changes that you would, implore Canada to make going into this game against Germany?
There is one change. I've talked a lot about the one-timer threat on the half wall on the power play. There is one more change I would like to see them make on the power play, and it's to put Oliver Bonk on the bumper. That man is lethal in the bumper position for London in the OHL. And I wonder if putting a defenseman in the bumper slot is very rare. And for him to be having so much success with it this season, I would like to see them do that just for funsies, even just like see if it works. Like they tried him there once in practice. I guess they didn't like it because they never went back to it. But I think maybe at this point you're searching for an answer to your power play. You can't funnel pucks to the inside. You don't have a guy in that bumper spot right now who can get the puck off quickly enough. And I think the world of Owen Allard, he's really impressed me this tournament, but he's not the guy I want in the bumper on the doorstep. I would put Oliver Bonk there. The other thing is I would probably bring Celebrini up to the first line, get him with Geeky and Savoy, see what there is, because we know there's chemistry between Geeky and Savoy. We know there's chemistry between Celebrini and Geeky on the power play. So can they find that success at even strength? And this is probably going to trigger a lot of Leafs fans, but I think your boys have to come down the lineup a little bit. Especially Easton Cowan. I just don't think he has it right now at this tournament. Like fourth, like the second line was pretty rough tonight as far as turnovers went, as far as, losing offensive zone draws and then having the puck go right back the other way. They couldn't even win it back. So I think probably Cowan's got to come down at least to the third line, and they got to break up that identity line or whatever they called it at the beginning of the tournament between Baccalard and Danielson. I hate that name so much.
Oh,
they did. Yeah, it was.
We should have known
so
it was
bad.
cursed. We should have known it was cursed.
I couldn't take it seriously after that, but they got to break it up because I don't know. I don't feel like that line is as defensively dominant as it kind of felt like in those first couple of pre-tournament games. Maybe, yeah, there's a lot of changes I would try. I mean, you got to move Raykov and Wood and Jaeger up further up the lineup, and then I don't know, we'll see. Like this could all be for naught, right? I mean, they could roll back the same 4 lines and they could probably demolish Germany in 2 days. But then that doesn't really solve any problems if they have to face the US or Slovakia or Czechia in the quarterfinals. So because we know they're not finishing first in the group now. So the question is, neither of those 3 teams in the crossover are going to be easy outs. So we're in for an interesting next 48 hours and then an interesting quarterfinal matchup, regardless of what the result is against Germany, especially if they don't figure any of this out. So
yeah, absolutely. So before we wrap things up, I want to, just give a shout out to everyone who's listening live in the chat. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you guys. My name is Lyss. I do the Game Over Winnipeg shows over here at SDPN, and I'm joined by Lauren from EP Rinkside. So we're here chatting a little bit about this 2-0 loss to Sweden today. Before we head out, we want to just give you the opportunity to ask Lauren any questions that you might have. So please feel free to drop them in the chat. And so while I give people a chance to do that, because I know what we're doing live right now is a little bit behind what people are seeing live on the YouTube feed. But let's just talk super, super brief about Group B. Just to scooch, we've talked a little bit about, the Slovaks, the US. Everyone's come up a little bit in conversation so far. But for people who may be a little bit less familiar with kind of how Group B is looking, just give us your thoughts on, what the crossover for the playoffs might look like for Canada and what some of the threats are in that division.
Yeah, so today was really interesting. The US went all the way to a shootout with Czechia, which they obviously only they ended up winning that game, but they won't get 3 points in the standings. They'll only get two for the post-regulation win. So they can't, if Slovakia beats them on New Year's Eve, Slovakia will win Group B, which I don't think anybody saw coming into this tournament. I think everybody thought that the US was a sure bet to win that game. And I think if you look at, Slovakia has played basically, I think their only struggle game was against Switzerland, and that was the second half of a back-to-back after they pretty much demolished the Czechs. So they were probably emotionally a little bit worn out from that game. And so you're looking at a well-rested Slovak team, a well-rested US team, I think, heading into that New Year's Eve showdown, and that should be probably the most highly anticipated game of the entire round robin. I think especially since Finland has kind of fallen flat. I thought heading into it that the Sweden-Finland New Year's Eve showdown would be the most anticipated one. No, I think it's actually the US-Slovak game. So that'll be really fun to watch. The winner of that game wins the group. And, obviously the Americans are super high power offense, but they've struggled defensively a little bit. They benefit by being in the weaker of the two groups. But, they can be exposed. And I think Slovakia has the offensive talent this year to really push them and give the US kind of a good run for their money. And, if they can beat Czechia 6-2 and Czechia can take USA all the way to a shootout, that game could be a lot closer than any of us kind of expected heading into this tournament. So Group B is really fascinating, I think, especially after today's results. And it's setting up some really exciting showdowns for New Year's Eve.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm gonna ask a couple of quick questions here. So we have one in the chat here. Easy one here from Carl the Man. So standout player for both teams, good and bad. So I'll start with mine. For Sweden, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. No one gets a standout bad for me. But I want to give a shout out to Noah Ostlund. Not just that goal. I thought he had a really fantastic game. He was a really fun player to watch. Sabres prospect, I believe, but color me shocked, man. They pull these guys out of the woodwork. I remember JJ Peterka from a couple tournaments ago. I'm like, who? Like, I love when we come and watch some of the Sabres prospects light it up in those European teams. So I thought he was fabulous today. Standout good and bad from Canada. I'm gonna give my good. This shouldn't be that hard for me. I'm gonna give my good to Owen Beck, and I'm gonna give my bad to Fraser Minton. That's who I'm gonna give those out to. And again, we've talked about this all show. Fraser Minton wasn't awful, and Owen Beck wasn't amazing. So these aren't really polarizing good and bads, but those are my quick little highlights on from Team Canada. Lauren, what are your thoughts?
All right, so I guess Sweden, the easy thing would be to go goaltender in Hugo Havelid with the shutout because he hasn't allowed a goal in 2 games now. But I also really liked Jonathan Lekaramäki. I thought he played really well. And Tom Willander and Theo Lindstein, that pairing was really solid defensively. Like they were that was, I think it's their second pair, but that was like they were really good today. And obviously Willander had that great goal where I think he scored the first goal where he walked right into the slot and he beat a screened Rousseau. As for Canada, I mean, this game probably should have been like 6 or 7-0 if not for Matthews Rousseau. So I think he's got to get the nod there. I don't really think anybody else kind of played to that level where they deserve that kind of like best player of the game. And obviously Rousseau, both goaltenders were the best player of the game for their respective teams. So this was really good. I think we've seen enough now to know that, just because a goalie's under 6 feet tall doesn't mean they're necessarily bad. And NHL teams should maybe give those guys a chance because they could turn out to be really good and be like UC Saros. So
and literally Henrik Lundqvist said that on the stream, and I was like, yes, push the short goalie propaganda, my guy, because it's so true. Yeah. No, 100%. Okay, another question here. Got to give a quick.
I didn't do a bad, but no, that's okay. I mean,
want to hear your bads.
I don't really have that many bad. I mean, I thought everybody struggled as a whole, but for a guy who came back from the NHL, Matthew Poitras just hasn't looked like he's found it yet. He's been struggling a little bit. I really hope to see him get going. I wonder if maybe the Bruins send him back to Guelph for the rest of the season too. I'm not sure whether they keep him about past 40 games. But it's always going to be a struggle for a guy to readapt to junior after playing like 3 months in the show. So, I'm not overly surprised by Poitras' struggles. I mean, the team as a whole doesn't look that great, but I did expect a little bit more from a guy who is, coming back from the big leagues.
Yeah, no, and even like the Willander goal, right? Like it's just kind of the prime example of the like, come on, man. You know better. You know better. Don't do that. Don't do that kind of thing. So, yeah, and I got to give a shout out. I have a couple people in the chat here that are regulars from Game Over Winnipeg, and they're asking if you have any thoughts on Fabian Wagner and on Elias Salomonsson, the two Winnipeg Jets prospects that we have planned for Team Sweden. No worries if you don't. Personally, I didn't notice a ton from either of them. I thought Salomonsson looked good, but I've been pretty high on him for the last year and a bit. So, any thoughts on those two players for Team Sweden?
I mean, Wagner, I thought really looked good as far as like a depth checker, forechecker, really good, defensively responsible, well positioned. Poor Elias Salomonsson, man. Like, I mean, he was suspended for that one game
I know.
for the boarding call, and then he took that penalty on Savoy in the third period, that tripping penalty where Savoy was just gonna dust him in the foot race. Just really kind of struggling on the penalty side of it all. Like, I think he's just got to toe the line a little bit more, and then he'll be good to go. Like, both guys have looked fine when they're not making kind of mistakes like that. So
Yeah.
And I think was it Fabian Wagner who pushed back into the boards? I don't even remember. I thought
really?
I don't remember exactly who it was, but for some reason that name sticks out. So I could be completely wrong.
Could
But
be.
yeah.
Okay, question from Blake. How likely is Canada to seriously demote Minton after giving him the C just optics wise? I feel like the second part of that question's a little bit of a reach, so I don't know about that, Blake, but and you know what, me defending a Toronto Maple Leaf is kind of a crazy thing to say on the stream here, but I think the question is a super good one. Do you think they're gonna, be willing to, kind of push the optics of the captain being pushed in the lineup and all that aside to do what's best for the construction of the roster and demote him if the time comes to do so?
Here's the thing. Before the third period, I would have said absolutely not. Like, there's no way I would ever thought that Fraser Minton would have been lower than second line. And then the third period started, and it was Beck centering Savoy and Geeky, and my mind was just blown. Like, never in a million years did I think they would ever do something like that. So I think the coaches are going to have a hard look at the game tape from this game. They're going to have a hard look at their guys that they have. And they're going to have to make some tough decisions. And, I think anything is sort of up for grabs right there. Everything's up in the air. I mean, Minton, between the 4-minute minor penalty he took for the high stick or whatever it ended up being on Lekaramaki, and then the kind of casual play in the defensive zone, the turnovers, like, this is a guy, like, if he wasn't Canada's captain, he probably would have been pulled back or at least benched for after maybe the second period. But because he's your captain, you can't bench him. Like, there's no way they're ever going to bench him. So, like, maybe he comes down, maybe he centers the second line. I don't necessarily think he's been that effective on the wing. So maybe you bring him back to center. You kind of rein him in a little bit, get him in a position where he's more comfortable playing, and see what happens, whether that's first line, second line, third line. I can't see him going any lower than that.
Yeah, no, 100%. It'll be very interesting, and as we often say when I close out these shows, my segue into the outro, only time will tell. So it'll be very interesting to see how the next couple of games, hopefully a couple of games, and see how many Canada has left in the tank, go for the squad. I know we're all rooting for them and hoping for the best, because, that's kind of, you can never take the Team Canada out of the girl, right? So we're hoping for the best for the Canadian squad, but it'll be very interesting to see how they fare against Germany, and then how the playoff structure ends up looking, with possibly some upsets still to come in Group B. So just to wrap things up, thank you so much, Lauren, for joining me today. This has been super fun. SDPN and EP Rinkside have been having a super fun time together over the course of these streams. It's been great so far, and we have more to come as far as Canada continues to make it throughout the game. Lauren, before we sign off, can you give us a little bit of a plug about what happens over at Elite Prospects and, all the kinds of great content that you guys put out?
Yeah, so we're I guess primarily known for our like scouting side, which is our EP Rinkside editorial side. I write there occasionally, like usually once every month. I'm their OHL scout, so Ontario is my region. So I do like a stock watch every month on guys who are rising, guys who are falling. We do a lot of great work with like my colleagues Mitch and David and Lassie, like everybody who works. Like I'm learning so much from them. They're like geniuses or whatever. But it's they do a lot of great work with their film rooms, their draft retrospectives. Like always, I would highly recommend checking out their articles, subscribing. They're like I know there's a paywall on most of the articles, but I believe it's well worth the investment. I subscribed to EP Rinkside before I was hired, so uh, I guess I can speak from experience that it's well worth the price for the subscription. Elite Prospects also has a bunch of great features on the main site that are advanced stats filters, compare players. Like there's a whole bunch of like treasure trove of like different features that you can check out, play around if you're a subscriber. And then yeah, like I also run the Elite Prospect socials, so check us out, Twitter and Instagram mostly these days. We're doing a lot of great content with World Juniors, so keep an eye out on that if you're curious.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was a very full circle moment for me for this, doing this official partnership with Elite Prospects when, 5, 6 years ago, the guys that we were in high school with were always flexing their having an Elite Prospects page. And I'm like, guess what? I could really, if I tried hard enough, I bet you I could talk to the team and get your page removed. Loser. No, but over here at SDPN, obviously, many of you guys may be familiar with what we do over here. Tons and tons of different shows, but specifically with this one here, we're doing Game Over for the World Junior Tournament, just like we have Game Over for every single Canadian game that is played in the NHL. So all 7 markets have their own shows with their own amazing set of hosts. Can't speak highly enough of my colleagues over here at Game Over and all the good work they do on the 7 respective shows we have here. So make sure if you're ever interested in watching the games, we have a lot of people here who may not be specifically fans of any of the Canadian teams. So if you've never checked out a Game Over before, there's one after every game. If your team is ever playing against the Canadian market, make sure you check out the stream. They're all here at SDPN. And also, just a selfish little plug, we're only about 1,000 subscribers away from 100K, so it'd be really fantastic if you could hit the like and subscribe on your way out to get us up to that number. It's a pretty big milestone. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us live. For everyone listening back later, we appreciate the support. We'll be here for every game for the rest of the World Junior Tournament, so long as Canada is involved. So Lauren, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really awesome. You can check out Lauren on Twitter. Her handle is at LauraKelly24. My handle is at Alyssa Houde, where we're always talking hockey with all kinds of amazing people in the community. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a fabulous rest of your day, and we will see you next time.
Yeah!